With the WINN FM News, I am Kevin Brown. Our top stories: FAO Country Programming Framework Session addresses resilience and food security in St. Kitts and Nevis. 2 officers inflicted with minor wounds after breaking up a fight, police say. Fort Lands discovery, investigation underway into death of Herbert Joseph Carty. Trotman brothers found guilty of wounding Keon Fifield with intent to murder. Gas to Energy project facing a 2026 completion date. St. Lucia Development Bank earns Green Climate Fund accreditation after 6-year process. Internationally, 20 killed after trucks overturn in Gaza, Hamas-run civil defense says. Now, the details. On August 1st, 2025, the Department of Agriculture in St. Kitts convened for the FAO Country Programming Framework (CPF) session. The discussions focused on evaluating the progress of the 2022-2026 framework and exploring the next phase of the Resilient Caribbean Initiative. The aim was to ensure that all efforts remained aligned with the national priorities and to fortify the collaborative relationship between the Food and Agriculture Organization (FAO) and the Government of St. Kitts and Nevis. The FAO Country Programming Framework (CPF) for St. Kitts 2022-2026 is a strategic document delineating the FAO's core areas of technical cooperation and its medium-term programming to bolster the Government of St. Kitts and Nevis. The framework is linked with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and the Twin Island Nations' own Sustainable Island State Agenda, particularly concerning agriculture, food security, and rural advancement. It reflects St. Kitts and Nevis's National Development Plan along with COVID-19 recovery strategies and other pertinent documents related to agriculture, food security, and rural development. The CPF defines precisely where FAO will extend its technical cooperation and support to the government over its 4-year span. The CFP centers on 3 pivotal strategic areas: inclusive rural transformation aimed at fostering sustainable agri-food systems and cultivate equitable rural societies. Food and feed systems is dedicated to enhancing agricultural and food systems, thereby promoting improved nutrition and a healthier environment. And resilience and risk management, designed to augment the country's capacity to manage risks and build resilience in the face of climate change and other unforeseen challenges. St. Kitts and Nevis, like many other small island developing states, SIDS is particularly vulnerable to the severe impacts of climate change, including rising sea levels, more intense storms, and shifting weather patterns. These climatic shifts directly threaten the nation's coastlines, water security, and food systems. The country's economy, heavily reliant on industries such as tourism, face significant risks from these environmental threats. Damage from hurricanes, tourism losses, and rising sea levels is projected to cost the Caribbean $22 billion annually by 2050. The Resilient Caribbean Initiative actively supports St. Kitts and Nevis in addressing these vulnerabilities. It aims to improve water resource efficiency for increased agricultural productivity through an integrated water, energy, food nexus approach, which includes promoting technological innovations such as solar-powered micro-irrigation systems, hydroponics, and rainwater harvesting to enhance water efficiency and management. Furthermore, the initiative aims to foster access to clean, climate-smart energy like solar and wind power to boost agricultural water productivity. Aquaculture plays a pivotal role in strengthening food security, especially given the Caribbean region's high food import dependency. The initiative supports St. Kitts and Nevis's efforts to develop its agriculture industries to enhance the resilience of its fisheries and aquaculture sector. An altercation occurred shortly before the close of the August 5, 2025 Culturama 51 street jamming activity. According to the police, 4 women were involved in a physical fight. One of the individuals was armed with a knife, and 2 police officers sustained minor cuts while attempting to quell the altercation. The unnamed person is now in police custody. More information will be provided as it becomes available. Authorities in St. Kitts are currently investigating the circumstances surrounding the death of 63-year-old Herbert Joseph Carty, whose body was discovered on the morning of August 3, 2025. The discovery was made at the Old Bridge Club property in Fort Lands Bastille. Carty, aged 63, was known to be without a fixed place of residence. The body was found in an advanced state of decomposition. According to police reports, the cause of death was not immediately observable. An autopsy will be conducted to determine the specific circumstances surrounding his passing. Further updates are anticipated as the investigation and autopsy proceed. On August 1, 2025, Justice Ian Morley, King's Counsel, delivered a verdict in which he found Devon Trotman and Dijon Trotman guilty of wounding Keon Fifield with intention to murder him. The violent incident took place on March 7, 2021. Fifield suffered extensive injuries as a result of the attack and was hospitalized until March 25, 2021. Unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries while in the hospital. In court proceedings, Justice Morley outlined the horrifying details of Fifield's injuries. He sustained 11 stab wounds, including multiple strikes to his head with a concrete block. The injuries also incurred severe wounds to his face. One stab wound penetrated the left side of his face and cheek. In contrast, other injuries affected the right side of his upper face. Witnesses at the scene described a struggle involving a gun, which Devon brandished against Fifield, who was seated in the passenger seat while Dijon was in the back seat of the vehicle. During the altercation, the car crashed and both brothers then attacked Fifield outside the vehicle. Justice Morley noted that both Devon and Dijon acted with violent intent, using a knife to launch a brutal assault on Fifield. In addition to the wounds inflicted with the knife, Fifield was struck multiple times in the head with a concrete block, suggesting a premeditated and coordinated attack. Following the assault, the brothers attempted to evade legal responsibility by seeking medical attention at Mary Charles Hospital rather than the Joseph and Franz General Hospital where Fifield was taken. They also destroyed their blood-stained clothing to conceal their involvement. During the trial, Justice Morley emphasized the significance of Dr. Cameron Wilkinson's potential testimony regarding Fifield's treatment. He indicated that if Dr. Wilkinson had testified, the jury might have held the Trotman brothers culpable for Fifield's death under the but-for principle. This principle establishes that if it were not for the attack, Fifield would not have been hospitalized. Consequently, he would not have developed deep vein thrombosis, which ultimately led to his death from a pulmonary embolism. There was an argument that Dr. Wilkinson's failure to administer necessary blood thinners constituted an intervening cause that disrupted the chain of causation, suggesting that the brothers should not be held fully responsible for Fifield's death. However, the prosecution's position was that the attack was a substantial contributing factor to Fifield's death. Justice Morley recognized the complexities surrounding the case, noting that without Dr. Wilkinson's testimony, the court could not be particular that there was no intervening cause that could absolve the Trotman brothers of greater culpability. Acknowledging these legal uncertainties, the Director of Public Prosecutions made the decision to withdraw the murder charge against the brothers, citing the necessity of ensuring justice was served fairly. The brothers' sentencing for wounding with intent to murder is scheduled to take place on September 17, 2025, where the court will determine the appropriate penalty for their actions. The maximum sentence is 25 years. In regional news, gas-to-energy project facing a 2026 completion date, News Source Guyana reports.
Well, Vice President Barbara Jagdeo has assured that a much-talked-about gas-to-energy project will be completed next year, guaranteeing cheaper and more stable electricity. The project was slated to be completed at the end of last year, but it has been dogged by multiple delays. It involves the transporting of gas from offshore through a pipeline to an offshore facility at Wales on the west bank of the Marara, where it will be processed and used to power a 300-megawatt power plant and a natural gas plant. During an interview on 94.1 FM on Monday afternoon, Mr. Jagdeo said the project will also address the country's decades-old power outage problems. The project, which is being heavily criticized by the opposition over the billions being spent, is a flagship project of the governing PPP.
That plant is under construction, will be completed next year. Okay. When that happens, we will then cut electricity price by 50%.
So what part of next year is this supposed to come on?
It's slated for about mid-next year.
Okay, fair enough.
So 50% cut in electricity prices.
And the lights are going to stay on.
Yes. Well, then we'd have a base load station. So for the lights to stay on permanently, you need to upgrade the transmission system too. So that's why we've awarded a $420 million project to transmit the power on these steel towers.
Mr. Jagdeo said he is not fazed by critics of the project, as he is aware of the benefits it will bring.
So once it goes on those steel towers at the back there, then you can have a stable grid and you have redundancy on the grid. So that's the second phase of the investment. That's why we're hiring this supervision firm to supervise that contract to ensure quality.
Once completed, the vice president calculated that Guyanese will save more than $500 million annually in costs.
St. Lucia Development Bank earns Green Climate Fund accreditation after a 6-year process. DBS St. Lucia has the details.
The St. Lucia Development Bank, SLDB, has been accredited as a direct access entity, or DEA, by the Green Climate Fund, GCF. The SLDB achieved this landmark feat at the GCF's 42nd board meeting in Papua New Guinea and is one of 8 entities globally to be accredited. Before getting accreditation, St. Lucia had to go through multinational funding agencies that were already accredited by the GCF, like the Caribbean Development Bank, to access climate financing. During a press conference, Cornelia Sidoni, the SLDB's managing director, explained the rigorous process that took the bank 6 years to gain accreditation.
To show that again, you had the national endorsement, the formal application, the institutional assessment. We had to put in place an action plan for those gaps that we have, and there were a number of gaps. There's still some gaps that we need to fill, and then we got the GCF approval. That was part of the process.
The National Designated Authority, NDA, within the Department of Economic Development played a key role in the SLDB's accreditation by providing a national endorsement. For the NDA, which sees climate financing as a catalyst for development, this is a significant step. GCF focal point Nadia Wells-Hyacinth further stresses that a clear and precise country program is vital to accessing this financing.
What we have within there is a very clear pipeline of initiatives that will attract climate financing. And SLDB now becomes the vehicle which we will use to access this financing rather than going through a third entity which would have been external to St. Lucia.
Paul Hilaire, Permanent Secretary in the Department of Economic Development, welcomed the accreditation, as he says climate adaptation and resilience is a challenging issue for the department, given limited finances.
From a perspective of economic development or national planning, how do we create that adaptation? How do we build resilience in our economy? And as I said, it's not only about infrastructure resilience, but we need to look at safeguard mechanism for persons, for water management, for electricity, and the list goes on.
The GCF accreditation positions SLDB to scale up initiatives like the Resilient Green Affordable Housing Project earmarked for Balata. Additionally, it will aid in expanding support for vulnerable sectors such as fisheries, water security, and renewable energy. For the DBS News World, Miriam Montoute reporting.
We now bring you these international reports.
Let's turn to Gaza now, where the Hamas-run Civil Defense Agency says at least 20 people have been killed when 4 lorries overturned on a crowd seeking aid. It's not known what caused the vehicles to tip over near the Nuseirat refugee camp in the centre of the territory. Gaza's health ministry says 138 people have been killed by Israeli strikes over the last 24 hours. It also said 5 more have died from malnutrition, bringing the total since the war began to nearly 200, around half of them children. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will hold a cabinet meeting on Thursday to discuss a reported plan for the full occupation of Gaza. It's a move that's been condemned by the country's opposition.
I
told the Prime Minister just now, occupying Gaza is a very bad idea. The state of Israel does not go to war unless the majority of the people are behind you. And the Israeli people are not interested in this war. Occupying Gaza is a bad idea operationally, it is a bad idea morally, it is a bad idea economically.
Yair Lapid there speaking a little earlier. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Hugo Bachega in Jerusalem. Hugo, good to see you. I want to begin, before we get into the politics, I want to begin by talking about some pictures we've received of aid being dropped from the air. Now, this is something that the aid agencies have said is, highly dangerous for the people trying to get hold of that aid. And Gaza City, the danger is obvious as desperate people rush forward to try to make sure that they can reach some of that aid, Hugo.
Exactly, Anita, and I think it really shows the desperate situation for the vast majority of the population in Gaza as this catastrophic humanitarian crisis continues, according to the United Nations. Aid agencies say that, airdrops are not going to solve this crisis. They have been urging Israel to allow more lorries into the territory. They say that, still a very limited amount of aid is getting in, despite the easing of restrictions announced by the Israeli military under international pressure because of the situation in Gaza. There was some Israeli officials are saying that what is also happening is that 80% of the lorries getting in are not reaching their destinations, and that's because the lorries are being interrupted by looters, by criminal gangs, but also by crowds of desperate Palestinians trying to seek aid. So there is also a problem that, in many parts of Gaza, this aid, is unable to reach, large numbers of people. So this is, another factor in this very, complicated crisis happening in Gaza. A number of countries blaming, the Israeli restrictions on the entry and distribution of aid for the current situation in Gaza, something that the Israeli authorities have strongly rejected. But again, we continue to, receive reports of people dying from starvation and malnutrition as a result of this crisis in Gaza.
To those comments then by Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid saying that a full occupation of Gaza would be operationally, morally and economically unjustified. Will that hold any sway with Benjamin Netanyahu ahead of this cabinet meeting on Thursday?
Well, it seems that the Prime Minister has already made a decision to expand the military operation. I think the question is about how far he's willing to go. So a number of reports quoting an unnamed Israeli official, widely believed to be Prime Minister Netanyahu himself, saying that he has decided to fully occupy Gaza. Now, this is a plan that faces strong opposition from parts of the military leadership. There was a very tense exchange yesterday in a meeting between the Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff of the Army, who told him that an occupation of Gaza would be a trap, and that an expansion of the military offensive in Gaza would endanger the lives of the hostages who are still being held in Gaza. And this is very much the position of the families of the hostages who are against an expansion of the conflict in Gaza. They say that the only way to rescue the hostages, the 20 hostages who are believed to be alive in Gaza, is through a negotiated deal with Hamas. I've got to say that, the recent polls in Israel have been consistent in saying that the vast majority of the population want to deal with Hamas for the release of the hostages and to end the war. The most recent poll last week suggested that 80% of the population in Israel want the end of the war. So any decision to expand the conflict is likely to be extremely unpopular in Israel and also among some Israel's international allies.
Sudanese cholera patients already displaced due to war fill a United Nations-run makeshift clinic at Tawila displacement camp in northern Darfur. The rainy season, combined with poor living conditions and inadequate sanitation, has led to an outbreak of the disease. Mohila Ibrahim has been at the clinic for 4 days with dizziness and diarrhea. Since mid-June, aid group Médecins Sans Frontières has treated 2,500 cases, a spokesperson told Reuters. Some 52 people have died, according to an advocacy group operating across Darfur. Vaccines needed to stem the outbreak, if provided, will take time to arrive given the rains. Tawila is now hosting 500,000 displaced people after the country's paramilitary Rapid Support Forces stepped up its assault on the nearby Al Fashir city and attacked a massive displacement camp. A recent assessment found only 10% of people in the camp had reliable access to water, and even fewer had access to latrines. Most families report eating 1 meal a day or less. Halima Muhammad Adam, a cholera patient, says she has been begging at the city's market for 6 months.
I have nothing at home and no one came to me at the hospital. If I'm back home, we don't have anything to eat.
One doctor at Tawila said cases of malaria, which is more dangerous than cholera, were also increasing due to the conditions.
With lightning speed, the wildfire has devoured an area bigger than the city of Paris. Forests and villages alike have succumbed, with many more in its path. Residents and tourists forced to flee. In this corner of southwest France, houses have been reduced to smoking ruins. Many roads are closed, and despite the intense efforts of firefighters, conditions may well worsen before they improve.
Sur le terrain, vous savez qu'on a quasiment 2000 sapeurs-pompiers.
On the ground, we've got almost 2,000 firefighters. That's 600 vehicles and a large aerial presence that you often hear above your heads. It's a very significant presence in total. In the area, we have at our disposal the maximum number of personnel and resources that we have in the south of France in its entirety.
This blaze alone has already consumed as much land as was destroyed by wildfires in France in 2024, while more than doubling the destruction wrought in 2023.
It is important to know that the risk of fire is greatest in the Mediterranean. In France, this is the hottest and the driest area of France. But with climate change, these fire risks are expected to become more significant during the summer.
Much now will depend on wind direction, either slowing these flames or fanning them in multiple directions, as fire crews describe a disaster of unprecedented scale. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera.
A meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff ended after 3 hours, with a Kremlin aide saying the two men had a very useful conversation where they exchanged signals on Ukraine. The meeting took place 2 days ahead of President Trump's deadline for Russia to make substantive moves towards ending the conflict or face more sanctions. After talks with the US president on Tuesday, the Ukrainian president Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the threat of tougher US sanctions on Moscow. And after a deadly strike close to the main Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant overnight, he's urged the US to increase pressure on the Kremlin. Well, let's speak now to Vitaly Shevchenko, Russia editor from BBC Monitoring. Vitaly, first of all, the two men, Steve Witkoff, President Putin, exchanged signals on Ukraine. What on earth might that mean?
We don't really know, Anita. We don't know if America's and Russia's positions are any closer. All we know really at this moment in time is that the Russians, they looked happy. They made happy noises after that meeting. Kirill Dmitriev, Russia's chief negotiator, said that dialogue will prevail. And Yuri Ushakov, who is President Putin's foreign policy advisor, and he was there at that meeting for almost, well, at least part of the meeting, maybe all of it, we don't know that. He said that it was a very useful and constructive conversation. And he said the thing that's stopping the Russians from saying more about what sort of signals the two men exchanged was that first, Steve Witkoff has to report back to Donald Trump about what he has discussed with Vladimir Putin. Then we will know more. But looking at Russian media coverage, they are slightly circumspect and restrained in their commentary. So it's a waiting game at the moment. Of course, Ukraine will be looking at signals coming from Moscow and Washington as well, particularly whether Donald Trump will make good on his promises of imposing further crippling sanctions on Russia and possibly Russia's trading partners. But so far, and I'm still speaking about signals, anything that we've seen the Russian army do in Ukraine and rhetoric coming out of Moscow, these signals do not suggest that Moscow is any closer to ending the war in Ukraine or even restraining its appetites in Ukraine. As you say, Russia carried out a missile strike on a riverside resort in Zaporizhzhia this morning. 4 guided missiles, glide bombs, killing 2 people, injuring at least a dozen more. So this isn't a welcome signal for Ukraine at all.
Okay, Vitaly, thank you very much. Vitaly Shevchenko, Russia editor for BBC Monitoring. And as Vitaly was saying, so far we are only getting the readout from the Russian perspective. We haven't heard it from the US perspective yet, which of course is very significant. Well, Russia has more than doubled the number of drones and missiles launched against Ukrainian cities since President Trump's return to the presidency, a BBC Verify analysis shows. We're going to bring you that BBC Verify report later in the programme. But first, let's speak to Barry Donadio, who is a former member of the US Secret Service and elected Republican official. Barry, thank you very much for your time today. And it's the intensity of those attacks by Russia on Ukraine, including on civilian targets, that has really tested President Trump's patience with Moscow. So, as I mentioned, we only have the Russian side of this meeting so far. But do you think Steve Witkoff will have taken a harder line in this meeting than perhaps on previous occasions?
Thanks for having me. And I think Witkoff has the toughest job in Washington, D.C. right now. He has to go and tell Vladimir Putin something that he doesn't want to hear, that probably the United States is going to levy extreme sanctions against Russia if this war doesn't come to an end, or at least some steps to come to an end. So I have faith that he can do something, but this really rests on Vladimir Putin and their decision. And unfortunately, this is leaning much more towards the Russia actually probably made this decision long ago, even before they started to go all the way under any circumstance. And, you know, we just might be trying to negotiate with a side that really doesn't have it in the cards to negotiate until they meet their full objectives.
Yeah, well, President Zelensky says the Kremlin will only approach serious peace talks if it begins to run out of money. So do you think President Trump will actually go through with these sanctions, or might he be minded to shift deadlines? He has done that, of course, before. Do you think he should stick to his deadline and introduce more sanctions, plus those secondary sanctions on countries that trade with Russia?
The Donald Trump I know is to be taken seriously. If he's saying he's going to do something, he sure is going to do it. You know, whether that's going to be an escalation between the United States and Russia is yet to be seen. But I would bet a paycheck on that. If President Trump says he's going to do this, he is certainly going to do it.
And do you think at the moment, if we look at sentiment in the Republican Party and in the MAGA movement, is that sentiment supportive of President Trump introducing these further sanctions?
Yes, absolutely. MAGA, the Republican Party, supports President Trump 100%. He's doing exactly what we elected him to do. He is getting results. We also have to remember he stopped 5 wars, so within 5 months. So he's trying to stop a 6th war. It's not easy. Like he said, this is a war that was started in another administration. He's trying to get it to come to an end.
This is the one that he said he would end almost immediately, isn't it? This particular war. Obviously, he has signed a deal with Ukraine on rare earth minerals and other natural resources. So do you think the pendulum is swinging towards Ukraine in Donald Trump's mind, or is he trying to reach a point where he has a deal, if you like, with both sides?
No, obviously, you called it just correctly. I think the pendulum is swinging towards Ukraine. We saw Donald Trump wholeheartedly try to do a peaceful negotiation, a neutral negotiation, without picking a side. No one in the world can say that he didn't try. And yes, it's proven to be a lot harder than he or any of us had expected. A lot of us were hopeful that he could end this rather quickly once he was elected. But again, if the other side, which is Putin, and we don't even blame Russia, we blame Putin. If Putin decided way before Trump even got elected, you know, you're up against only one party that wants to negotiate, that's Ukraine. And Russia has no want whatsoever to negotiate. That's what we're left with. So we will see by the end of today when Witkoff talks to Vladimir Putin where we are. But I'm not very hopeful.
You were listening to the WINN FM 98.9 newscast. Our top stories were: FAO Country Programming Framework Session addresses resilience and food security in St. Kitts and Nevis. 2 officers inflicted with minor wounds after breaking up a fight, police say. Fort Len's discovery, investigation underway into death of Herbert Joseph Carty. Trotman brothers found guilty of wounding Keon Fifield with intent to murder. Gas to Energy project facing a 2026 completion date. St. Lucia Development Bank earns Green Climate Fund accreditation after 6-year process. Internationally, 20 killed after trucks overturn in Gaza, Hamas-run civil defense says. Thank you for listening.